Hey there everybody, and welcome back to another Blender tutorial where today we are going to be making very realistic eyeballs. As you already saw, we're going to be able to control the way it looks and also the dilation of the pupil and all this. But the twist is, unlike other tutorials where they procedurally make the iris and this and that, I'm going to be showing you kind of like a cheat, very streamlined way to make it, but the results are realistic. And by the way, before I begin, because I like to rant, I'm at this new location, this Airbnb, so if any of the audio, the video glitches, it's their fucking fault, okay? I'm just trying to get a mobile setup going. You can see this place is a mess. Not really. I feel like I exaggerated that. But yeah, let's do a mobile tutorial, making eyeballs. Super simple stuff. And you can see I've made this like monstrosity scene where there's like a bunch of fucking eyeballs in a sphere. This is what the panopticon is in literature. They say that no matter where you are, they're looking. But all of these dilate, all of these rotate. And you can see this is actually going to be mostly a material tutorial. Actually, it's just a sphere with a very fancy material. This is essentially what we're going to be making. The geometry nodes from over here is just making it beyond the sphere. But I digress. I believe we should begin. So the only thing you're going to need for this tutorial is Blender, maybe a bit of free time, and an image of an eyeball. So yes, this is where I said we are going to be cheating a little. Just type an eyeball into Google Images and pick one that you like in terms of the color, in terms of just the look, the reflection, and all this. And I believe I downloaded this one with the yellow background. We are going to be using this to quickly streamline our process. We're going to be using that project from view. There's no reason to be making all of this yourself, especially if you don't need this hyper, like, $10,000 model, right? Download an image. I downloaded this one, okay? Once you do that, we can begin. And I guess I don't have my keyboard shortcuts. Oh, no, I do in this version. Beautiful. I'm using 3.1 alpha, by the way. So I'm going to take all this. I'm going to delete it. And what is an eyeball, really? It's a sphere that you messed with a little. So we're going to be using a sphere. Mesh, UV sphere. And to get a bit more geometry, let's hit Control 2. That's going to apply subdivision surface, not of level 1, but of level 2, my friends. And there we go. For the material, or really just applying the texture, we're just going to be doing the quick and dirty way, right? So in shading, make a material, call it eye, and import in that image texture, whichever one you downloaded. Again, I downloaded, I think, yeah, the one with the yellow background. And for now, we don't need this BSDF. Just connect that directly, and you can see, wow, looks like an eyeball. What it's doing is it's taking our texture, just applying it to the sphere with its default unwrap, so it's going to look weird. We need to make this fit our sphere, okay? To do that, go to UV editing. You can see, again, if I make this visible, you can see it's basically using this default unwrap. It's not looking very good. We got to do the work ourselves. So let's go to the top view. Reason being, you can see the geometry has a pull up here, so I thought maybe let's just make the iris there. I mean, whatever. And for that, we're going to hit U. We're going to hit project from view. You can see now we have this sphere unwrap from the view that we unwrapped from. And, you know, same idea, but now we can just kind of fit this to our eyeball. The more closely you do this, the more stickers you get when you poop. Did your parents do that too? You didn't poop, you didn't cooperate, so they gave you stickers or something? I mean, mine did. So there you go. You can see now we have this eyeball kind of like 50% of the way there super quickly, right? We need to do a lot to it to make it customizable and not just look like we slapped an image. But you can see now it's fitting. Only caveat is because it's a project from view, we're also going to get this on the bottom, which isn't a bad thing. I mean, you have two eyeballs. So next order of business, I guess, is let's get rid of this eye on the bottom and add a couple more veins on the back to replace that with. So go back to shading. So again, we have this image, but now with a special project from view unwrap, and we want to get rid of the stuff on the back. Well, to get rid of the stuff on the back, let's make kind of a quick veiny looking thing. To do that, I'm going to use Voronoi texture. Why? Kind of seems like a random thing to use. If you set this thing to distance to edge, you're going to notice we get these lines, which is what I'm going to turn into veins, and the idea is we're going to make veins, right? No matter what settings you pick here for randomness and scale, you're going to see it kind of just looks like shards of glass or like asphalt or something like this, like you divided it into sections of concrete. To get it to look more like veins and more like wavy and all this, we need to actually mess with the coordinate system. So you can see, generally this is using generated coordinates generally, we need to distort those. The trick for this, and we might be using this one or two more times, so pay attention, take a noise texture. This is going to be our source of randomness. They're both using generated coordinates. And what I want to do is mix the original coordinate system with some of this noise. So I'm just going to mix these. You can see it works. A bit of advice, just set this to linear light. It makes our lives easier. Where now the factor very directly controls kind of the waviness of this. And more so, the noise texture lets us kind of pick the waviness. So let's have higher detail, as you can see. And you can play with the roughness and stuff like that. So we do that. And then I'm just going to change the colors to be red for the veins and white for the eyeball, right? So you kind of pick this reddish, pinkish thing for the vein and whitish for the thing, and that looks pretty good. All we need to do is mix it together with our eye and, do a bit of work there. So to mix these, I'm just going to send them through a mix RGB. So now it's going to show 50% of both, as you can kind of tell, right? We want it so that it's only in the back section. So we just need to make a little blend. I'm going to take the generated coordinates and let's see. We want to separate from top to bottom. So it's not the x-axis we want. It's not the y-axis we want, but it's the z-axis we want, going from top to bottom. So it's black down here, and it increases to white, right? If you send this through a math addition or subtraction or something like this, you can see we can now control this gradient. Take this, connect it, view it, and we are in business, sort of. Let's see. I feel like this is inverted at the moment, so let's flip these. And if I now move this number, there we go. So you can see, unlike before where we had the thing, now the back is changed. And we'll make this look better. So why does this look out of sync? Well, the shade of white seems a bit bright, so let's bring that down until it blends in. And the veins could be kind of a more intense red and a bit higher contrast. And you can see these don't blend in perfectly, but once we do the principled BSDF and all this, it's going to come out quite nice, actually. So I'm just going to change the gradient here, and then just like before, where we applied a noise to break up our Voronoi, I'm also going to apply noise to break up our gradient, because right now it's just kind of this, I'll move the number, it's just kind of this linear gradient. I want it to be broken up a bit. So just same thing as before, take a noise texture, mix RGB, this is the formula for success it seems. Mix these together, set it to linear light, and this is there we go, and this is a way to always break up a thing. So let's see what this looks like now. And then we're almost done with this section. We'll get to the fun stuff like the dilation and all this. So before, and then after, you can see kind of breaks it up a bit and makes it a bit more interesting. Let me just play with the colors a tiny bit. It seems like the veins are just the tiniest bit purple, maybe a bit desaturated, and the white might be a bit darker. Okay? There we go. So we have our eyeball now. And by the way, you can always take the Voronoi scale and control the amount of veins. And you can always change the, aspects of it. But I'm happy with that. So now that we have basically our color map, just kind of like a base texture we're going to use, let's take this and send it through a BSDF, which is what is going to make this look good. So take a principled BSDF, send it through base color. So all this work we did, you could even take it and frame it, Shift P, put it on your wall. We're just going to send it through base color, and we can change the roughness and all this later. I'm going to view this in rendered mode. Right now you can see it's pretty dark because there's no lights, but you can also see it's kind of blending together a bit better, which was kind of the point. I'm just going to set this to cycles. So we're viewing it through a ray traced engine, and I'm going to apply an HDRI so we can see this thing with good lighting. An HDRI is basically an image that you can download for free on HDRI Haven, and it's going to be a spherical map to light our scene, as you can see. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to go to film, I'm going to go to transparent, Bob's your uncle. I don't know what the fuck that means, but I hear people saying it. And there we go. We have this thing lit in 3D space. Now why does it look bad? Because it just kind of looks like a sphere with the texture. So let's make it look good. First thing we can do, take the roughness and bring it down. This is what makes it look shiny. And eyeballs are shiny, right? Every time we blink, we're kind of adding moisture to it, right? So make it shiny, or you could also add some clear coat. As you can see, that adds a little extra something. Do whatever needs to be done. And also, just a bit of extra detail, we can take the iris area, make that a bit bigger. Doesn't need to be perfect. And we can extrude it out just the tiniest bit. And notice, after we extrude, it's going to get subsurfed, so it gets smoothed out. And now this has a bit of more curvature, like it's coming out. It looks more like realistic in that way. Okay. So we have that. Still doesn't look too good in terms of an eyeball, and that's because it's just kind of like a stationary sphere. Actually, the motion is what sells this quite a bit. So I want the iris dilating, and I want the eye moving around. But pretty much what we've done here is like an okay setup. If you're like very far away, you can't tell. Like, looks good. Okay. And by the way, you can always play with this with the different H to your eyes. Like you could pick this one, and you get a different kind of look. Okay, so let's do the iris thing, which is kind of the most complicated part of this tutorial. So the iris is, or the dilation thing, we want to kind of stretch and squash this image texture so it almost looks like we rigged up this thing that makes the eye contract and close, but we didn't actually do that work. How are we going to do that? Well, we're going to basically manipulate the UV map, because if you go to the UV editing and you wait for Eevee to load, you can see that what we have, if I load in our image texture, is again, this is just like a project from view, right? But if we kind of scale and do this, you can almost see how the eye looks like it's dilating and contracting and all this. So that's how we're going to do this eye kind of getting bigger and smaller and bigger and smaller, except we're going to do it procedurally. So to do this, we need to manipulate the UV map, ideally without keyframes or anything like this. So here's how we're going to do it. We're going to take texture coordinates. I'm going to look at our UV coordinates, which again, I'm just going to put this down here in the corner because it will be easier to remember how this is going to work. What we want to do is we want to scale this up and down from the center, which is the vector 0.5, 0.5. The way UV space works is this is 0, 0. As we go on X, it increases to 1. As we go on the Y, it increases to 1. So this is halfway on X and Y. It's 0.5, 0.5. So we want to scale from that vector. How do we do that? Well, if we take this and we do a vector math, so I'm taking our UV coordinates and I'm scaling them, and you might think, okay, we just scale it. What's the big deal? You're going to notice that it kind of, and I guess what we should do here is connect this to our image texture. So this is the UV coordinates that mess with our image texture. You're going to notice that when we scale it, it doesn't, it gets bigger and smaller, but it's kind of taking some of this yellow from the background. This is because it's scaling towards the vector 0, 0. It's scaling down here, so we get some of that yellow. Again, we want to scale to 0.5, 0.5. There is no node that lets you do this, like pick where you want to scale to, so we need to do this manually. Here's how you do it. Take vector math and do an addition, and we're going to do this on both sides. So we're going to do an addition and then a scaling and an addition. So it's kind of like in the sandwich. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add negative 0.5 on X and Y, and then I'm going to add 0.5. And I'll explain why in a second. So the idea here is we take UV coordinates, we're going to shift it down. If we just kind of suppress this and this, it kind of just shifts it down. So the center is at this yellow. It's like we took our circle and moved it down here, right? We're moving it down here. Then we're scaling, because now we're scaling from the origin, something we can handle, and then we just shift it back. So in other words, this is a little coordinate system that lets us lets us scale from a custom vector. So if I just do a combine X, Y, Z, we can generalize this a bit. If you don't understand this, well, I guess we don't need to combine X, Y, Z. If you don't understand this, just think of this as a shifting, a scaling, and a shifting that lets us scale from any custom vector. And the idea is now when we do this, let's see. Yes, beautiful. So we're still getting a bit of yellow, but you can see now we're scaling from the iris. From the iris. And the idea here is we just need to do a bit of fancy math now to get this to kind of scale up and down really quickly, and it's going to look like the iris is contracting. How do we do that? Well, we don't want this to first of all scale everywhere, otherwise we get the yellow, but we do want the iris to get small. So we need to do a function for the scaling. We need to say only inside this gradient. Do it. How do we make that gradient? Simple. Take a vector math. I know it's a lot of, this is just like up to the difficulty really quickly, but this is again the hardest part. Connect this to distance. I want to see where our coordinate system, well, I guess you could just use UV coordinates, why not? We want to see, we want to isolate the area of the iris. So when we look at this and we say what is the distance between our vectors and 0.5, 0.5, you can see we get this kind of radial gradient that is exactly where the iris is. Again, 0.5, 0.5 is right here on the UV map, and I'm saying give me the distance. So very close to it, it's going to be black, and as we get further and further away, it gets white. The idea, though, is now that we have this gradient, we can control it using this map range, right? So I could flip this and then do some manipulations here. And you can see with this map range, I've now isolated this thing. How did I do that? Well, I basically flipped 0, 1 to 1, 0, so I'm inverting it. Instead of going from black to white, it's going from white in the middle to black. So you can see black's on the exterior. And because we have this clamping, if we didn't, we'd have some issues with the negatives. But because of this, we can now pick the size of this. So the idea is, inside this white area, I want there to be scaling, and otherwise I want there to not be scaling. Okay? Simple enough. Only other thing we need to include, I know, is we need to add 1 to this. Why? Because if we don't want scaling on the black areas, this is basically, if I was to plug this in directly, it's like I'm saying scale by 0, which is a manipulation. I want it to scale by 1, multiply by 1, do nothing. So this makes it so that all of this is 1, and then you can't see it, but the middle is even brighter. So let's see what this looks like. I'm going to connect it. Might not look perfect from the get-go, but you can see now this isn't exactly what we want yet, but you can see the scaling is only affecting part of this, as you can see. And if we play with the right number, and we'll figure out what the right number is, but we can get a, there we go, it's kind of like this one. We can get this contraction of the iris, just like that. So let's see, why does this look incorrect so far? It looks like our map range is a bit too big. So how am I going to fix that? Well, for now, let's have it scale by 1, so it does nothing. I know we're getting into weeds here. And temporarily, I'm going to mix our texture with this gradient, so we can see one on top of the other. Let's view that. So you can kind of tell. Let me get rid of this addition. You can tell that we have one on top of the other. I'm just going to scale it so it's the size of our iris. Something like that. So this gradient we made is the size of our iris, so this is the only area that's affecting it. We add 1, we do this, we don't need this anymore, and let's view that. So now it's really just a matter of figuring out what number we want. So let's just play around with this. So I think it ended up being this one. This is what we want for the contraction and dilation. I wouldn't worry too much about what this map range is doing because I don't even follow, to be perfectly honest with you. But the only thing that matters is it seems like this number, when we flip it through like -0.2 to -0.5, seems to be doing what we want it to do. So now the idea is we need to procedurally animate this number going from -0.5 to -0.2. Instead of doing keyframes, simple way to do this. Take a noise texture. Set this to one-dimensional. Kind of a clever trick here. Noise texture on one-dimensional just outputs a number. On every frame, it's going to give us, well, not yet, but the idea is on every frame, it's going to give us a number, just one thing that we can control and input, like that one with. So, only thing to do is with this noise texture, you can see it's outputting a number. We want to animate this W slider, which is basically saying change over time. Fast way to do this is you just take hash frame, I've done this a million times, divided by 100. Hash frame says take the frame number, dividing by 100 says make it 100 times slower. So when we preview this, you can see the colors kind of flickering a little as we're playing this. If I wasn't to divide this by 100 but 10, you'd get a seizure, right? It's too fast by 100. We take that, we connect it to this, but again, we don't want to just output a noise texture and use this as the iris thing, because it's outputting numbers between 0 and 1. So when we view this, well, I mean, it's kind of doing it, as you can see. It's looking procedural and all this, but it's doing weird stuff. Again, we need the numbers to be between -0.2 and 0.5. So we're going to use a map range for our map range. And we're going to go from 0 to 1, the thing it's outputting, to something like -0.2 to -0.5. And now you can see it's still doing something, and we need to adjust these numbers, but it's only contracting it right in this way. And let's see, if we go very negative, it gets bigger, and if we, what's like the limit of what we can do here? Maybe like -0.03 or something like that, or 0. So I'm going to set it to that. I just want this to be right at the very limits. Oh, did I put the wrong thing here? -0.5. Let's take that, let's connect it, and see what this looks like. There we go. So now you can see we have our iris contracting procedurally, and it looks pretty good. And you can actually control the speed of this, and just like before with the noise textures to, that we used for mixing and stuff like this. We can control actually, it's weird, but with the detail and the scale, you can control the behavior. Like, is it twitching or is it slowly pulsing, right? So if I bump up the detail, the motion of this is going to be much more quick and sharp, like it's quickly adjusting to the light. And you can pick what you want from that. I'm thinking that it's still a bit too fast, so I'm going to make it divided by 160, and I'm happy with that. So already this adds a stupid amount of realism right off the bat. Another thing we can do, I guess, this would just be a simple one, is instead of just this being a thing with low roughness, base colors, we could add a normal map, just kind of a quick and dirty way. Take a bump, take this whole color, again, this is just the plain base color, right? Mixed with the veins in the back, right? Take this, connect it to height, we turn this into a normal map. That looks a bit weird, but whatever. Take it, connect it to normal, and now it's a bit strong, but you could see there's actual like surface imperfections on this. There's shadowing. I found that it seems like there's a bit too much going on here. So you take the distance, you bring it down, and it's not going to incorporate all of these, just some of it. Let's try 0.05. Yeah, so now we're only getting detail in the most high contrast areas, and take down the strength. So here is a before, and here's an after. It's subtle, but it definitely adds some stuff. Look at how this reflection back here is being broken up. Again, this isn't technically accurate, but whatever. And the nice thing about this is the normal map now is also contracting with this, which is pretty cool, I think. So I think we're done with the material. You could go in and make it even more complicated and, blend. And by the way, you can see the veins are really blending in now. And maybe we should have more veins. Yeah. You can see it's all blending in now. I think the final thing I want to do with this at this point is I just want to animate it looking around, which is, again, one of the easiest parts. The eyeball iris contracting was actually much harder. To get the eyeball looking around, what is looking around? It's basically rotating it, right? So I just want to keyframe the rotation. So I'm going to keyframe rotation. And again, just like last time with the iris, I don't want to keyframe every single movement and rotation. I want it to be procedural. We can do that here too. So make sure you add that keyframe, because now when we go to Graph Editor, you can see we have this on X, Y, and Z. If you didn't do that, this wouldn't be here. And what we want to do is you can see all these graphs are flat because the rotation isn't animated, so it's just flat. We want to add some noise right off the bat. So on the, let's see, X is up and down motion, it seems. So on the X, I'm just going to add a modifier. I'm going to add a noise. So now you can see if I was to use the frame all command, my laptop doesn't have that, but you can see the X is now wavy. The I is going up and down. It's a bit fast, so let's slow it down. This first number, scale, is the kind of the how long are the waves, so how slow is this? So I'm going to make it slow, and then the strength, the amplitude, I'm going to bring down so it's not moving up and down as much. You could see this is adding some good motion. Just like before where we added detail to the iris, so it's kind of like contracting and all this very quickly. Same thing with the eye movement. Add some depth is what this one's called. And you can't really see it on the graph, but as you increase the depth, it's going to get very chaotic and sharp. If I make this a bit bigger, it will be more obvious. Let me use solid view. So you can see instead of going up and down in these waves, it's kind of like very fast in its decision making almost. Very erratic. So I'm just going to bring this back down. And I'm happy with that for the X motion. Let's copy that. So I've taken this modifier and literally just copied it. And let's just reuse it on the Y. So now it's going to be able to rotate this way as well. So now you can see it's rotating two ways. Make sure to offset this so it's not the same everywhere. Does this button frame all? Oh no, you probably can't hear that, but I'm getting text. You want to offset this so that they're not using the exact same curve, so X and Y are independent. And now you can see, oh, we're rotating on two axes. Maybe this one I'm going to make a bit less strong. Maybe a lot less strong, because on the Y is kind of weird. And on the Z, I'm going to paste it one more time, so now I can rotate this way too, kind of change the direction in which it's looking in that sense. Again, offset it. Maybe this is something Look Dev is better for. Now you can see this thing is kind of looking all the way around, kind of like the Eye of Sauron scanning, and it's doing the iris thing, and I think altogether it looks really good, in my opinion. And you could, again, push this iris thing even further, by, again, changing these numbers. I think if we go too high, we get some weird distortion. So I'm just going to go up to like 0.06 maybe. And now the iris should be going much crazier. or it can get much smaller, really. And that's the essence of what I did. I mean, at this point, I just kind of took this model and kind of pasted it on a sphere with geometry nodes. But you could see just the motion is what sells it. And the material ain't bad either, right? Put this on a basic scene where it can shadow stuff. And that's looking pretty juicy. It's looking attractive in a gross way, right? So I think that's the essence of it, right? We did a good material. We did a tiny bit of modeling, right? Again, we brought out this iris just a tiny bit. You could do more with that. We did this animation and all this, and I think that's everything I have to teach with this. How long did we go for? 25 minutes. These tutorials have been getting long. Anyways, hopefully you learned something. Hopefully you enjoyed. Yesterday I was trying to do this Eye of Cthulhu thing, which is why I was messing around with the eye. I didn't get to the Eye of Cthulhu, but we made a bit of progress. Maybe I'll take this to the next step. Just add more procedural layers on top. But hopefully you enjoyed this, and as you can see, hopefully, at this point you're seeing credits for the Patreon. Why should you join Patreon? Maybe. So first of all, if you decide to join Patreon, link in the description, you join the ranks of like 710. Some people, it always changes, but you get a bunch of benefits. So you get blend files, so you can just get, I'm going to upload this blend file of the eye so you can just use it. I mean, I'm going to pack the image texture and all that into it. Get the blend files for this and anything I've uploaded over the last 3 years, just right off the bat. Additionally, you get early access to tutorials. You could have seen this early, and exclusive tutorials. I'm doing one a month. Haven't done the one for this month yet, but there's a bunch of benefits. Head over to the Patreon and check it out if you're interested. But it is the most direct way to fund this channel and the CG Matter channel, and it's the reason I can just go to this random attic Airbnb and record tutorials and make that work. So I'm appreciative of the patrons, and I need to find more tutorials I'm interested in. I want to maybe take this to the Eye of Cthulhu level. I just haven't been inspired by much recently, so I got to figure that out. Either way, hopefully you learned something, and that's it.